Welcome everyone. We'll declare the meeting open at 4:06. Acknowledgement of country. The Shire of Harvey acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their cultures, and to elders both past and present. Item 2, record of apologies and leave of absence. Have an apology from Councillor Adams. Item 3, declarations of members and officers' personal interest. Councillor Jackson.
Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Item 5.3.2, Parent Naturalist Partnership MOU. I'm council delegate for that group. And item number, and it's, I'll stay in, and it's a impartiality. Same goes for 5.3.5, the chairman. Parent Naturalist Partnership is part of that report, so I have an impartiality as I'm council delegate on that committee.
Councillor Burgoyne.
Yeah, I declare a financial interest in item 5.2.4. One of the tenderers for that tender is a business owned by my employer. I declare that financial interest and leave the room.
Councillor Dickinson.
I have impartiality for 5.1.2. I'm a council delegate for the Arlo Workshops Committee. And I will, stay in chamber for it.
Councillor Carboni.
Yeah, I have a financial interest in item 5.2.4, the Leisure Drive car park. One of the tenderers in this I have a financial relationship with, so I'll exclude myself from the debate on that one. Thanks.
Yep. You're good. Bergie, your hand's still up, mate. Thanks. Okay. Item 4 is deputations, which is nil. Item 5, officers' reports. 5.1.1, COVID-19 response, Shire of Harvey. CEO, you wish.
Sure. Councillors, this report proposes a financial response from the Shire relating to impacts on the community as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It addresses the notice of motion from Councillor Adams, which is in the council agenda, and also the item from Councillor Carboni, which was raised at the previous council meeting. Although the item raised by Councillor Carboni was lost, the general discussion from council was that there was a need to provide further information regarding the financial impact of any Shire initiatives to provide a considered response. We've also received correspondence via WALGA from the Premier requesting support from local government to relieve the pressure on the community and businesses through relief actions such as no increases to rates and fees and charges. And this is also being supported by the Walga State Council through a special meeting, noting the contributions already delivered by local governments to their communities, and also providing and requesting further consideration of a suite of actions. So the matters addressed in this report are primarily financial in nature and relate to actions that have already been taken, and also those that are proposed to be delivered to relieve the pressure on ratepayers and businesses. And there's a number of actions there. Among those, no increases to rates and fees and charges, waiving fees for home occupations, deferring self-supporting loans, and also relieving lease payments for a commercial entity. The financial cost to the Shire through the loss of revenue from the closures of Leisure Centre and Harvey Recreation and Cultural Centre is estimated to be about $1.3 million. And these proposed initiatives will also have a financial impact of approximately $1.1 million next financial year. In this report, we haven't included the Shire's response into supporting the community. To this end, we've developed a community support plan, and that is currently being implemented. A report in the agenda in regards to funding a COVID-19 response grant program forms part of this community support plan, and that will be considered and discussed further in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we've got a list of questions with regards to each item. So if I run through the questions and then get a response, from Mr. Winter with regards to the first 12, and then the CEO has one to answer, and then if anyone has questions after that, if we just do the old hand signal, if everyone's happy with that. So have we got Dean? He's ready to go. So question 1, how many rateable properties do the Shire of Harvey have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. We have 12,642 properties currently.
Okay, question 2, does this suite of initiatives apply to all ratepayers in the Shire, e.g. residential, retail, commercial, rural and industrial?
Yeah, the hardship policy is intended to apply to everyone, individual or business, that can demonstrate that they are actually in hardship, and there is a criteria within that policy that, that covers that.
Okay, question 3, what percentage of the 2019-20 rates were paid before the due date that attracted the 7% discount?
Approximately 69 or 70% of rates were paid by the due date, and they qualified for the discount.
Question 4, what percentage of the 2019-20 ratepayers were charged the minimum rate?
Approximately 17% of rateable properties were on minimum rates.
Question 5, what percentage of the 2019-20 rates remain unpaid or on a payment plan?
Approximately 12% of rates remain unpaid.
Question 6, does the policy COVID-19 financial hardships have an end date?
Yes, the policy, as per the scope, includes rates and service charge levied for the 2021 financial year. So anything over and above that would fall outside of the policy.
Question 7, will council be advised of any action taken under delegation 2.2.13 and 2.2.2 by staff?
So in relation to delegation 2.2.2, limitation is for projects already included in the budget, and as such would already have been discussed with council. These projects will also be included in the list of major projects, which council receives an update on monthly. So hopefully there would be sufficient communication with that one as it stands. With delegation 2.2.13, the intent of this delegation is to speed process and to minimise the number of immaterial items that currently come to council, keeping in mind that the waiving of concessions in this delegation only applies to charitable and not-for-profit community groups. The foreseeable biggest impact relating to this area would be write-offs of debts, which would relate to the sundry debtors that periodically come to council, and you would be aware that we talk about abandoned cars, library books, and those items that we haven't been able to collect on, and that we then approach council for write-off. So the intent really isn't to bring them to council, but if council would like a list of those ones that were to be written off under delegation, then we could provide that. Maybe, can I just go back to delegation 2.2.2, Mr. President? The intent with that one, local government has been pushing for a while to increase the tender threshold. State government tender threshold is at 250,000. And so one of the intents in this is it comes as not just a result of COVID-19, but also a push from local government to have this increase. One of the good things that comes through this policy also, and the ability of having it $250,000 as allowed by the regs, is increased support for local business. Previously, we would go out to tender, and often it wasn't the local business that would apply. This gives greater ability or scope to be able to use local businesses in this area.
Thank you. Question 8. Will these delegations lapse once the restrictions are lifted?
The intent is no, Mr. President.
Thank you. Question 9. Having due regard to the Premier's initial letter requesting councils adopt a zero rate increase for 2020-21, in the same letter, he also requested that councils bring forward planned capital works. Have staff determined this year, or will it be considered at the forthcoming workshop?
Yeah, staff have reviewed a number of projects, and they form part of that workshop, Mr. President. So we have, I'm not sure if councillors have already received it or if it's coming out today, but the Forward Capital Works Plan has a number of projects that are highlighted in blue, and there's also some other projects that, that staff are highlighting.
Question 10, recommendation 8 refers to a deferment of self-supporting loans. Is this for all current self-supporting loans or just binning up Christian Youth Camp and the Harvey Golf Club? If the latter, then those organisations should be mentioned in recommendation 8.
Yeah, Mr. President, these are the only two organisations that have approached us. The intent of this is to allow it for any of the self-supporting loans. We only have 4 currently, or entering into the 4. So we have the Harvey Golf Club, the Binning Up Youth Camp, the Harvey Football Club, and also soon to be the Brunswick River Cottages with a new big loan. So they're really the only 4 that would be included if their intention was to apply for this.
Question 11, has staff considered raising considerable loan funds whilst interest rates are at an all-time low? Given the Shire's excellent financial position to assist with hardship requests and, more importantly, bringing forward employment-making capital works projects to inject an economic stimulus into the community? Or is this a discussion for the planned workshop?
Yeah, Mr. President, we've left this discussion for that workshop. It is a big area and it's definitely a capacity that council has, but it really needs to be discussed in line with the individual projects as well. So we've highlighted that for the workshop.
Thank you. Question 12, officers' recommendation 1 to 2, number 6, the waiving of the lease payment for the Sterling Cottage for the period 1st of March for 6 months. As these payments are remitted to the Harvey Tourist Bureau to assist in the operational costs, how will this impact the Tourist Bureau, which will show a loss of $8,800? Should the geographical borders lift and people start travelling, I understand there is no changes to the budgeted Shire operations. In the last 6-month period, a request from Sterling Cottage, is a 6-month period a request from Sterling Cottage, or if they are fully operational in less than 6 months, will this be reassessed?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Sterling's Cottage approached us and asked for some leniency, so we've applied that. The 6 months was a figure that staff grabbed, if you want. The intent would be that if they were to resume business before that, that we would review it. And also if it was required beyond 6 months, then obviously we would need to bring that back to council. In relation to the impact on the Tourist Bureau, the Harvey Tourist Bureau has received the bulk of their funding currently, and we're treating them as two separate transactions. Historically, Sterling's Cottage have paid the lease payments and we've forwarded that, but our budget actually sees those as two different transactions. So our intent was to continue to pay the Tourist Bureau those amounts that we had included in the budget that we would pay them, but give leniency in relation to Sterling's Cottage as far as the lease payment.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. No more questions from me. Councillor Jackson.
Yes, in regard to self-supporting loans, we take those loans out on behalf of those groups, so they would be accumulating interest. How is that going to be managed if we defer payments?
So with those loans, council repays or makes those loan repayments as and when they become due. And then we raise a debtor's invoice to the club to reimburse us. So in effect, what we would be down in relation to our revenue would be the interest rate on our municipal account. So with these, you're talking a couple of $1,000, the bulk of them, a couple of $1,000, maybe $10,000. For 6 months, it's not a lot of interest cost to council.
Okay, so it would be an additional cost that we would absorb.
It would be a lack of cash flow that we would have in our municipal account to invest.
Okay, tough.
Okay, all happy with 5.1.1? Oh. Okay, that's Amanda. Councillor Lovett, do you need to make a declaration of interest on an item or?
Yes, I emailed that through to Kira this morning. It was, 5.5.2, the LLC cleaning contract. I'm a member there and I'm on the advisory group and I'll stay in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Did you get that one? Yep. Thank you. 5.1.2, Yali Workshops Redevelopment Master Plan Amendment. So, do you want me to read the questions out now? Okay, so I've got a number of questions here. So for Pauline, so question 1, more of a question regarding Yali Workshops Committee and their ability to maintain and operate this facility now and into the future. Are they still a viable committee with longevity, particularly with membership? And what is the plan should the committee fold, maybe due to lack of active members? Will the Shire take over the operation through a caretaker?
How I can answer that is the Yali Workshop Inc. have noted that there is quite a strong external interest of younger volunteers because we have brought this up in their meetings before. So there's a potential to get more assistance once the development is complete. They are still very much a viable committee and have got funds in their bank account to carry on with the restoration of the machinery that was in the steam sheds. Once the development is close to construction completion, the issue of the curation should be addressed by all of the stakeholders, And then I would suggest that a document be presented to the council with options for resolution.
Okay, next question. In light of the information provided in item 5.1.1 relating to the financial implications to the Shire's finances by COVID-19 factors, what are the implications if council decides to defer progression of the Arlute Workshops redevelopment design, documentation and construction of stage 1 until council has a clearer understanding of the financial and economic conditions and consequences of the COVID-19 response? In asking the question, I am aware of the need to be project ready to help kickstart the economy as part of a broader capital works program. However, question the timing of this item now in light of the situation and seek guidance as to the implications if this item is set aside for 2 months until we have a more definitive understanding as to the implication of the Shire's, states and federal economic situation. This question relates to broader community perception and reputations risk.
It's a very good question. Benjamin Franklin once stated, it takes many good deeds to build a good reputation and only one bad one to lose it. Governments around the world have weathered a lot of economic shocks before, especially the crisis in the late 2000s, in the late year of 2000. But the fallout from COVID-19 pandemic is very different. There are no modern analogues for the shutdown of the economic activity in most of the world. Understanding that, the federal and state government have actually created a map that's going to guide actions for us, for the local government in particular. And they've identified, number one, that we must be prepared to proceed development as soon as possible. This means preparing the development plans and documentation which will allow imminent construction, which obviously will enhance the region's socio-economic development. The development, as you know, will create a real boost to the local economy, that is the construction industry. It'll boost local employment, local manufacturing and industries, and local hospitality, not only after the development's done, but actually during construction, because people will be using the cafes, the shops, the local wineries, and even the local accommodation. Very interesting. We did a lot of phoning around to identify what the other local authorities, what their take on this was. Tourism has been identified by many of the local authorities in the Southwest, as well as the state, as the key economic driver post-COVID-19 shutdown. Projects that promote tourism are actually being given precedent and priority over other local developments, local government developments, in preparing for the lifting of the geographical borders. Many local governments are actually prioritizing the marketing of their cultural, heritage, sporting, and natural beauty facilities. A lot of the reasons cited is people have been in semi-isolation in their homes and the immediate districts. Many will have cancelled their previously made travel plans, and many of them just have a need to travel. National travel will be restricted for quite a period after the lockdown, and international travel, we've been told, could be locked down for nearly 9 months. So that proves that it indicates that tourism locally will be, there'll be a big move for that. On the design side, it's not actually what we're developing, but how we're going to develop it. So when we get to the details, we certainly will be reassessing strategies on moving forward. So we've been given this, from this threat, we've been given opportunities, both in the present and against future potential pandemics. And we can get really creative and agile in the planning and the design development at Yaloop. So on the sustainability side, to use locally sourced materials, we can use local manufacturers. We can get really resourceful on our planning. So we can encourage architects to design with an eye towards open spaces that enables and encourages people to spread out and actually reimagine and having less physical public gathering spaces. We can look at the detailed design from viral prevention, like less flat surfaces around, self-cleaning public toilets, ease of furniture cleaning, installing ventilation systems that allow for removing potentially contaminated air from any given space. Just on the public response, and in your question, you have actually noted there's a reputational risk. I think that with Yaloop in particular, given the fact that we have actually been paid out by the insurance company for the redevelopment, the workshop redevelopment has been the second most important project from the town development plan post-fires, and was actually identified as a flagship project basically since 2018 in our capital works plan. The community expectation is there that there should be no further delay to the construction of stage 1 of the development. I'd also like to point out that stage 1 development includes a men's shed. This is really important for the mental well-being of the local community, getting things up and running on a communal basis. And also it's got the potential to allow new volunteers to assist in the running of the workshop. We also, because State Heritage has a very big interest in the site, they have given us all the information of the protection of cultural heritage assets, particularly the remaining archives vaults and the equipment on the site. Given this, the longer we leave the development, the more damage is going to be done, and I really think they'll hold us accountable for that. There's also on the grant funding side, we have had written offers both from Alcoa and from FIFA, that is the Forest Industry Federation of WA. So the local businessmen as well have made verbal commitments to supporting the ongoing development. And I think given that we couldn't apply for some of the state government funding because the project hasn't been documented yet, we don't want to lose out on any further documents. And we certainly want the local businesses to see that we are serious about carrying on with this development. So in summary, I think to make sure that our reputation remains intact, this really culturally important tourism facility, as well as it's also a local economic development catalyst, should carry on, and we need to immediately get on with the construction documentation of this redevelopment, lest we forget.
Thank you. Now, next question. Has the Yaloop Workshops Committee been shown the master plan amendment, and what are their views on the revised version?
Right, so I've discussed the master plan with the committee, and they are broadly in agreement with the master plan concept. They are very much in agreement with the stage 1 development scope. They have requested a follow-up meeting following the council decision next week, and I'll be showing them the detailed plans that we have to date.
Next question, will the engine turntable that we use for turning the train engines have a footprint to acknowledge where it was located?
This detail will be included in phase 2. The architect and Shire officers will finalise the location and the interpretation with State Heritage, with the Yarloop Workshop Inc. and with the representation from Council and from the Shire itself.
Next question, will it be promoted that rail lines are there to be depicted using metal tracks on the ground and not just a different coloured brick, for example? The curation detail is to be discussed with the heritage and museum expert to be employed in the next phase.
Yes, the stakeholder input will be very important at that design stage when we get down to the detail, and that will certainly be resolved.
Next question, will the fire story include the Indigenous significance of fire and how it was a management tool and not just the bushfire devastation?
Yes, so all aspects of the fire will be included, including, this would include some of the fire management practices, as well as the detail of the fire. And that'll be, we'll bring that in when we organise the curation of the design.
Will the Indigenous history also be included and acknowledged? Absolutely,
yes. All historical pioneering, whether it's Caucasian or Indigenous, will be included.
Will a qualified curator be employed to manage the collection and gathering of artefacts for the site?
This is a discussion that for further down. The options will be looked at regarding heritage precinct and facility management in the future.
Next question, will the site be managed by the Shire and what will the role be of the Yarloop Workshops Committee?
So presently the site is owned by the Shire. The caretaking of the heritage buildings and equipment was bequested to the Yarloop Workshop Inc. in the 80s. State Heritage has jurisdiction over the site regarding development and management of the facilities. So the resolution of the query is to be determined under a separate forum by representation from all stakeholders.
Will all the building styles be reflective of the destroyed workshop style, or will there be an inclusion of modern style buildings?
Okay, so there will be a representation of the previous buildings in both scale and feel, as well as location. The interpretation will be a heritage-based, architecturally appropriate solution.
Councillor Beach, you've had your hand up for a little while. Question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. It probably relates back to the first question about whether it is appropriate to proceed with this project. The question is, I guess, we hold $7.78 million in the Yarloop Rebuild Insurance Reserve Fund. Would this project that under discussion right now list $2.75 million for consideration in the budget, would that come out of those insurance funds? And if so, I would assume it'd have no impact on rates. I don't know, Mr. Winter or Ms. Reardon might want to answer that.
Mr. Winter?
Yeah,
Mr.
Do you
Winter?
want to?
Yeah, the intent, Mr. President, is that those funds would come out of that Yarloop Insurance Reserve. We actually budgeted for that transfer for a lot of those works this year. So potentially, no, not an impact on rates. It would be looking at that reserve as we would see it.
Thank you.
Councillor Lovett.
Thank you. I sent through a comment to Kira this morning to pass on to Pauline. In the attachments, just got to tidy up spelling errors. You know, I think it was section 6 and 8 of the consultant's report. It just got the word interpretation. It's not spelt right. It's small things, but when you're presenting it to the public, it's really important that it's presented well.
Thank you. That's been noted. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Technical services, 5.2.1, Constellation Drive. Is there any questions at all? Oh, okay. Okay. Question 1, recommendation number 3, if funding from regional group is not successful, does the project lapse? Mr. Lotsnicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, the project won't lapse. We'll either continue to apply for regional road group funding, or we may look at trying to fund it from our municipal fund. But yeah, our preference would be to obtain regional road group funding, and if we miss out in the 2021 funding round, we'll try again in the next funding round.
Question 2, there was also talk of requesting the bus stops to be relocated from Constellation Drive. Was this actioned and or investigated?
Yes, look, there's no actual bus stop there. There's basically a left turn slip lane into an access way that will serve the tavern that's currently being constructed there. Now that the tavern's underway, we've determined that the buses may not be parking there anymore, but if they do, we'll need to speak to the school bus operators, and we've got some ideas where they could park, but it's not a formal bus stop, and they were really parking there illegally. And also we're looking at putting some signage up there at the moment, some no stopping signage.
Okay, all happy? Okay, 5.2.2, Old Coast Road, Travers Drive and Cathedral Ave intersection upgrades. Just have a couple of questions. Officer's recommendation. Come on, yeah, all good, yeah. If funding from regional road group is not successful, does this project lapse?
Again, as per my previous response, no, it'll stay a live project. We'll keep on applying for funding, and there may also be some other avenues of funding, possibly some black spot funding, maybe some DOT funding. So we'll keep on pursuing funding. Worst case scenario is that we do not get funding and there is an appetite for council to fund that project, then it may be funded through muni funds, but that'd be the last resort.
Okay, question 2. The new dual use path goes north from Travers Drive, but then there is no crossover to Cathedral Ave. The current crossover is south of the intersection, and it means cyclists, gophers cross at the intersection where it is not safe. So can continue from Travers along Cathedral. If a second crossover could be looked at north of the intersection where the new path is, that would be a great improvement.
Yes, I have discussed that with the councillor that raised that question, and yes, we will look at putting an additional crossing point in further to the north, and with a sketch, and that's doable.
Thank you. Question 3. Whilst this is an excellent improvement to the area, there is approximately a 1 kilometre section of road on Cathedral Ave itself where the trees overhang the road just before the chicane. That section of Cathedral Avenue is really rough and the cyclists are loath to use it for that reason. Whilst the adjacent pathway has been resurfaced, it's not practical to have the cyclists use that due to their speed and increasing numbers of pedestrians with their dogs. Have we or can we budget for that section of Cathedral Ave to be resurfaced in the next financial year?
Yes, we have, and I'll get back to that in a minute. With the works that is proposed in that item, it's council in 2008, December 2018, considered a report on the Bunbury Wellington 2050 cycling strategy and endorsed a whole raft of initiatives over the next few years. One of them was, the Old Coast Road paths, improving safety and whatnot, and also extending the path network along Cathedral Ave. The good news is that we've actually got $1 million from the federal government, the federal Black Spot program on next year's budget for Cathedral Avenue to construct, seal shoulders, remove hazards, install signage. So that'll go a long way to improving cycling along Cathedral Ave. Obviously, there's significant vegetation there that we'll have to sort of be careful with, the paper barks and whatnot. So we've got $1 million on next year's draft budget, fully funded by the Commonwealth Government.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay. Move on to 5.2.3, proposed Harvey Information Bay. Mr. Lotsnicker, would you like to just give a brief overrun on this?
Yeah, okay, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, look, I've come into this a bit later down the track, as it all started before I started with the Shire, but my research indicates that since 2015, the Harvey Main Street Committee has been investigating options for a suitable information bay on the Southwestern Highway, and the location opposite the service station there was identified as there is an existing laydown area there that was constructed many years ago by Main Roads, mainly for a stopping point for travellers and also larger vehicles as a bit of a rest area. And that's the location that's been identified for the information bay. The Harvey, one of the representatives from Harvey Main Street has been actively working on this, coming up with some plans and options and whatnot. It was handed over to Tech Services to come up with a final design and liaise with Main Roads and come up with some cost estimates. So that's what's presented in this report. There is some funding already allocated from the Alcoa Harvey Sustainability Fund. Also, we're looking at possibly getting some money from Main Roads and then council funding the remainder. An appetite from council to pursue this project. There has been some questions about whether that's the right location, whether it should be further to the north, whether we should look at Forest Highway. But this is the report that's presented tonight.
Thank you. Now, question time. Just first question, on page 27 under budget implications, a sum of 13,500 is identified as being available. Who is making this contribution?
So Harvey, the Alcoa Harvey Sustainability Fund, not the Shire.
Okay, question 2, who will manage the information on the sign and who will decide what goes on the sign? Will there be advertising and sign for local businesses?
Look, I suppose that's still to be determined. I would say the Shire liaison with Harvey Main Street would manage it. But it's determined and discussed.
Question 3, will there be a tourism focus and will businesses be charged a fee to advertise?
Look, I'm not sure if advertising will be allowed on the information bay, but obviously that needs to be determined and discussed. The intention is to sort of present this to council, because some councils will have seen this for the first time. And then obviously if it goes to the next step, all those sort of things would have to be discussed and determined.
Will there be Shire information on the sign?
I would say definitely.
Will it only focus on the locality of Harvey?
Again, that will need to be determined.
Question 6, has the Harvey Visitor Centre been or will be included in this project?
Look, I'm not sure if they've been included, but they definitely will moving forward.
Is the Shire considering updating other information bay sites, i.e. Yarloop?
Look, with Yarloop, we recently renewed that information bay. We didn't spend a lot of money there. It was less than $1,500. Because no work had been undertaken on that information bay for many years. There is some money on this year's budget. There's $15,000 to do something at the binning up information bay or sign there. Yeah, that's the only two I'm aware of.
Will the Shire consider other information bay sites into the future, i.e. what is there for the southern part of the Shire and other town sites?
Yeah, the adopted economic development strategy, which was adopted by Council in March 2020, focus area 3, tourism action 3.2 states, develop a strategy for tourist information bays and signage with a time frame of 1 to 3 years. So that is a work in progress, and that's our community development section is looking at that.
Question 9, Harvey Main Street Committee. Is this the committee's role? I thought they were responsible for the Harvey Harvest Festival and not tourism. Has the Harvey Tourist Bureau been consulted? Why are we considering this? It appears to be a duplication of effort and services when it is located within 2 kilometres of our major tourist bureau and not at the entrance of the Harvey Township.
Yeah, look, again, it's a good question. Look, as the report states, the project was proposed by Harvey Main Street Committee some years ago. And, you know, the officers are merely progressing the matter based on the committee's recommendations. I've had several meetings, myself and Manager Community Development, Economic Community Development's had several meetings with one of the representatives from the Main Street Committee. Yeah, that progressed to them coming up with a concept plan, us preparing a detailed plan, liaising with main roads, coming up with some costings. So yeah, so basically it was something, the wheels were already in motion with this, and Tech Services was handed the baton and hence to report to council.
Question 10, query the location. Is it the best location for the Shire Tourism Information Bay? Have we considered locating it on the Forest Highway near the entrance to the Shire of Harvey or Settlers Roadhouse? Surely this would capture more travellers. It appears to be an ad hoc plan from 2015 by a committee, but I'm not convinced it is their role. Have we got a tourism plan for the Shire?
Look, as just previously mentioned, council did adopt the economic development strategy, and one of the actions there is develop a strategy for tourism information bays and signage. Again, Tech Services became involved in this project as it's an infrastructure project now. I'm not sure whether the Forest Highway was considered at the time. I know there's an info bay near Settlers Roadhouse. Yeah, so yeah.
What was the site's original purpose? I have concerns with this location as it is close to a busy intersection, maybe not the safest option.
Okay, as mentioned, I think it was initially constructed by Main Roads many years ago as a rest area, pull off for motorists and larger vehicles. It is located within a 60-metre wide road reserve managed by Main Roads Western Australia, so it's well off the road. So it's in quite a safe location. It's on a level section of the highway. Also Main Roads in the past would have possibly stored road base or road sealing material on that large area.
Question 12, what is the approximate cost associated with maintenance and updating of the tourist information bay? And will that fall to the Harvey Tourist Bureau?
Look, again, I think that would need to be determined. I suspect the Shire would maintain it. I mean, as I mentioned, we only spent a small amount of money bringing the Yarloop information bay up to scratch. I think once it's upgraded to the standard as discussed in the report, there won't be a lot of maintenance work. Obviously, there'll be replacing the signage there. Who pays for that? Again, that would need to be determined.
Current funds available of 13,500. Where is that coming from? And if Main Roads WA does not provide the funding, where does the additional 30,000 come from?
Okay, as mentioned before, the 15,000 is from the Alcoa Harvey Sustainability Fund, and that's currently on this year's budget. The 30,000 would be requested from Main Roads from the road maintenance annual budget, which is quite substantial. And if all else fails and there's an appetite for this thing to go ahead, unless there's other funding avenues, it would fall on council to fund it.
Second last question. Is this a similar project to what is in place at Yarloop? If so, was that under the same arrangements?
Yeah, look, good question. It'll end up being a similar look as what we've got in Yarloop. I checked with staff that have been here a very long time, and that one was constructed before their time, so more than 30 years ago. So I'll put a call through to Main Roads to get a bit of background on that one, but I haven't received any feedback as yet, so I'm not sure.
Question 11. Whilst I applaud the idea of an information bay on South West Highway, I feel that the proposed bay is actually past the Main Road turnoff. Travellers, especially those with large vans, simply won't turn around and go back to Uduck Road. They will continue on to Brunswick. The idea is great. The proposed structure is sound, but I believe the positioning will be a waste of 125,000. If at all possible, it needs to be moved down the hill closer to the BP with plenty of time to be able to turn into Uduck Road.
Rick, can you hear us?
Okay, obviously utilising an existing area that was previously constructed. It's within a 60-metre wide road reserve. If it was to be moved further to the north, as suggested, obviously the first thing would be a brand new Main Roads approval would be required. And due to constraints at that location, you know, it may not be forthcoming given that the road reserve further north is only 30 metres wide. It's already got a 12-metre road in the middle and whatnot, so there may not be enough room to put one of these things there unless we looked at encroaching into some land that's not road reserve and not owned by us. The road gradient is a lot steeper there, so for larger vehicles having to stop and start at that location could be an issue. Narrow road reserve, as I mentioned. Drainage, obviously that would need to be considered at that location, and obviously there'll be substantial additional cost if we were to be constructed there, given that there's no existing hard stand area, and the hard stand area needs to be quite big to you know, sustain the types of heavy vehicles that would most probably park there as a rest area. And so, yeah, obviously the estimated cost, I would estimate, would be well over 200 grand to build something of that size at the northern location. But yeah, look, I take the comments on board. Obviously, you know, people go past the Uduck Road entry, and then there's the information bay. But yeah, there are some issues with having it further to the north, as I just mentioned.
Councillor Jackson.
Yes, just a little bit of background on this one, if I could. Main Street were charged, I guess, and came to being about beautifying areas around the Harvey town site, and the reason this has been on the list for so long is because they wanted to beautify that quite ugly presentation of Harvey when you're travelling through South West Highway. It's also a central point where advertising for events that were happening could be directed, you know, to the dam or down Uduck Road. So it is born out of the Main Street trying to beautify that area. The Harvey Tourist Bureau was part of the initial consultations around a signage strategy, and so sites on South West Highway, Yarloop and over on Forest Highway were all part of that discussion, and some sort of style guide, I guess, into the presentation was discussed back then. But there certainly was input from the Tourist Bureau, and the feedback we had around Main Roads guidelines on this was that there wouldn't be allowed to be any commercial advertising in Main Road space. So we actually talked about trying to perhaps use it as Shire-wide promotion, but put technology into play to try and highlight certain business or whatever. So just thought I'd add that to the discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Beach.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. I know I'm not getting into a debate at the minute, so I'll pose this as a question to the questioners. The questioners, I guess, coming from councillors and staff, aware that this area always has had a tourist information based signage that fell into disrepair, and one of the reasons it was taken down is that Main Street said, well, if you take it down, we'll design something else, which has taken some 5 years. So it's an initiative of a local group. Now, Main Street, I think, as Councillor Jackson mentioned, was established in the first place to attract tourism into, or vehicles into the Main Street of Harvey off the main road. And there's been many, many meetings for that to occur, but people simply bypass. I'm just wondering how many councillors are aware that that area on a Saturday and Sunday in particular is a rendezvous point for numerous four-wheel drive vehicles that have come down to the southwest, either to go up around the dams or to the four-wheel drive track at on the commonage there that is leased out to the Jeep Club, I believe. Motorcycle touring groups often meet there as a rendezvous point. Caravans meet there, and I do know from personal experience that people have gone across to the service station there and then are directed into town by the staff there, because it still amazes me the number of people I come across that said, we didn't know this was down here. So this is an important initiative from the group, and I do ask the question. Perhaps some councillors that have been asking the questions might just make themselves more aware of the need for this type of attraction. It is a stopping point and can be used to direct traffic into Harvey and to elsewhere within the Shire, I think one was the questions. And I think that is part of the idea. So I guess it is form of a question, form of a statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Caboni.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. I guess my concerns are that a lot like the author of the questions that you read out, and I take on board Councillor Beach's comments just then with regards to the groups that use it on the weekend. It's also a spot where trucks pull up because it's one of the few places you can pull up to get lunch or something to eat with a large combination. And it's also a place where the brick trucks break up their road trains to cart the bricks into the smaller streets inside inside Harvey in the subdivisions. So I guess my concern is the conflicting interest with it being an information bay or a visitor bay, as well as all these other interest groups and the trucking companies and that use it to pull up to access the service station. So you know, I guess I'm asking you, Rick, you know, what's your view, especially when there's a tourist bureau just down the road a bit? Is there too much conflicting interest? And I know there's another truck bay on the south side of the entrance to the industrial area of the Southwest Highway. Maybe we've got to clearly demarcate, because I noticed in the plans there's bus bays and there's car bays, but there's not truck bays. So is there going to be too much conflicting use with this area? And do you move the trucks down to the truck bay further south, I guess? I just see too much conflict there. So I'll just ask your view there, Rick.
Yeah, look, good question, Councillor. And yeah, looking at the plan, it's all about cars and buses, no trucks. And I suppose it's the times that you know, trucks would use it as against when, you know, others are using it during the weekend or this, that, and the other. But yeah, look, it is something we need to look at in terms of the conflicts and that, and sort of take that on board and look at the one further down, and just look at it from a safety point of view. And I think moving forward, we'll probably need to look at that. Obviously, there's a fair bit of bus parking along there, whether that could be redesigned, allow some sort of truck parking in there, and look at some, you know, safety improvements, move the car parking a bit further back, not have so much car parking there, and you have a zone further to the south that's trucks only. Yeah, okay, look, I think we can take that on board and sort of look at the design based on taking trucks and safety into account. I'm sure it's a very large space, and I'm sure it can accommodate a number of uses, but that would need to be taken into account in the design. This is just a conceptual plan at the moment, and obviously, you know, if there's appetite to support this moving forward, we can look at taking those comments on board and coming up with a bit of a redesign, discuss it with Main Road, and possibly even discuss it with the trucking representatives to see what their views are.
Councillor Bromham.
Yeah, thank you, President, through you. Rick, I'm just wondering, before we make a decision on this, have we got an actual strategy on our information, you know, tourist information? And if so, could you make it available to us?
Yeah, good question, Councillor. Look, the short answer is I haven't. As I said, as it sort of morphed into an infrastructure project, Tech Services came on board to look at the bricks and mortar, so to speak. And also the economic development strategy looks at coming up with a tourism strategy, and whether that'll be born out of that strategy. But look, no, I haven't got that. But that's not to say that isn't available somewhere. So I'd have to take that on notice.
Yeah, I just think, you know, it's a bit willy-nilly the way we're spending public money. So I think we should make sure that regardless where the information is coming from, that we have a very clear strategy within the Shire on how we're going to achieve what is our tourist aim. So I really appreciate getting that type of information before I have to make a decision on spending public monies like this.
Yeah, look.
Councillor Bromham, I'm unaware of a current tourism strategy. We have developed the economic development strategy, and as Rick has mentioned, this project has been in the pipeline since 2015. So I would say that if there's a requirement to develop a tourism plan, then this project would be shelved for another couple of years.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just believe we got a plan first. Been a bit of a Monash plan. Okay.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Jackson.
Yes, can I ask what happened to the signage strategy that this was part of, that Elliot Fisher was working on? I thought it was absorbing into the economic development strategy.
Yeah, Councillor Jackson, that has been the remit of community and economic development, and that is sitting with the officer to progress. I believe that a report was to be prepared for the May meeting, but I'm unsure about whether that will meet that time frame at the moment.
But that is still live and probably answers Councillor Bromham's question to some part.
Yeah, in regards to an overall tourism strategy, I'm unaware whether the Shire has a tourism strategy, but in regards to a tourism signage strategy, as I've mentioned, community and economic development are working on something in that regard.
Thank you. Okay, item 5.2.4.
Councillor Burgoyne and Councillor Carboni need to leave the meeting. So was that both Councillor Carboni?
Carboni's come back again. Made a comeback.
Yeah.
He's still in Parliament.
Okay, that's both councillors have.
Okay. One question with regards to this. There is a $50,000 discrepancy between the budget implications on page 29 of the agenda and page 4 in the confidential attachment. Is this a typo or is there another explanation?
Oh, Rick, he's muted.
Sorry, Rick, you're still...
I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, you're right now, you're unmuted. You can go again.
Muted before. Okay, there's a the budget is 200,000 for the parking and 60,000 for the drainage component. So the budget should be 260,000, not 210,000.
Okay.
So we'll have money left over.
That's what we like to hear. Councillor Beach.
29 then of the agenda, will that be changed to 260,000 to match
Yes,
what's in the confidential report?
That's correct, yes.
Thanks, Rick.
Okay, no more questions.
Back, please.
I hope there's just coffee in that, Councillor Burgoyne. Okay, item 5.2.5, tender T062020, supply and delivery of one vibrating smooth drum steel roller. So we have a couple of questions. So if I get into those and then Mr. Lotsnicker can answer. That typo, page 3, multi-pack special features, go East Coast, so that's noted and corrected. Just curious as to why number 3 was discarded. Certainly appears very competitive in price and met all other requirements. Maybe a longer delivery time and metro based.
Yeah, look, through the chair, reference checks conducted. Obviously, the evaluation panel, there's 3 independent persons sit on that panel. They assess the information that's provided. They undertook reference checks, the availability of parts, previous experience with a similar machine, and I suppose it all went to inform the decision, and also the information that was provided in the tender. Some information that was requested wasn't provided in the tender. Yeah, and the evaluation panel, each scored each item on the evaluation criteria. That's averaged out, and hence the recommendation before us.
Okay. No other queries or questions? Okay, 5.2.6, tender T052020, supply and delivery of 1 6x4 tip truck. Is there any questions regarding that at all? No, we just have a typo which is noted. Okay, 5.3.1, Leschenault Regional Park, endorsement of draft management plan, naming and memorandum of understanding. Mr. Hall.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'll keep it nice and brief. This particular plan has involved considerable input from a wide range of staff with from the Shire of Harvey. And it's to a point where we're all comfortable for it to go out to community advertising. There's 2 sort of components to the report, other than just the management plan, is the actual naming of the park itself. It's a local Noongar name, and that name has gone through the correct sort of process. Just trying to think of the name of that again. Helgullop Regional Park. It has a local derivative based on camping around campfires. It has the endorsement of all the local elders, and from an officer point of view, we see that it's appropriate to endorse that name and include that as part of the scheduled advertising. Additionally, you'll see that there is an MOU that has been proposed between DBCA and the Shire. That is modelled on the MOUs that the City of Bunbury have entered into, and I think Capel have done as well. And it's dealing with the roles and responsibilities associated with the land that the Shire presently holds, either in freehold or land that is vested to them and is going to be transferred over to DBCA eventually. But in the interim, that particular MOU is going to be the head of power to control those roles and responsibilities. But no, it's been a very lengthy exercise. As I said, there's been quite a number of staff that have been involved in this, but I do think this is at a point where we are very happy for it to go to advertising.
Thank you. Now, just 3 questions, Mr. Hall. I suggest point 1 be added to widely advertise to the Harvey Shire public about the change of name before the management plan is released for public comment.
Look, I think we would do that if it was our management plan. It's not our document, and it's not really the role of Harvey to hold back on state government process. The name has gone through due diligence with all the local elders, and I do think it's appropriate that members of the public get a chance to provide comment on that name at the time that the scheduled advertising is proposed.
Thank you. Question 2, will there be a more united and comprehensive approach towards pest control and management? And will we see improvements in this area, especially with the on-ground action and communication between the different agencies?
Simply put, yes, there will definitely be. And we've already started to see those benefits occurring on a day-to-day basis. We have very good interaction with DBCA staff always have, but this has brought the two entities a lot closer together.
And question 3, will there be more inclusive involvement with Noongar culture and employment of Noongar rangers?
Most definitely, and there are 3 Indigenous rangers already appointed for the regional park.
Thank you. Any other questions or queries? Okay, 5.3.
Oh,
Sorry?
Councillor Bromham.
I can't see his hand. Oh, sorry. Councillor Bromham. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Through you, just a quick question. Simon, I noticed that there's a lot of different people in the management circle in this. It's like a many-headed hydra. I'm just wondering about how effective that will be into the future with the park, and also how this will affect the finances as far as the our council is concerned.
Through you, Mr. Chair, look, there are quite a number of entities involved in on-ground management, and I think that's purely a complexity of just the terrain and the type of issues that we deal with. I think as far as funding is concerned, and Mr. Dandridge would probably be the best one to further explain this. I know he has discussed it with council before, but the only area of concern with regard to potential financial implications on council would be to the CLAG with regard to the mosquito management of the estuary. But other than that, we don't believe that the Shire is inheriting any additional management obligations. In fact, we're getting rid of quite a fair bit. So going forward, I think it could be a much easier exercise for us to some degree. But if Mr. Dandridge has anything further in regard to the financial implications and why that might exist, I'll hand over to him.
Yeah, through you, Mr. President, the school's out at the moment on the CLAG funding. Currently, the CLAG funding is provided to local governments because we undertake mosquito control on land that is under our care and control. However, with the change of ownership, there's a question over the fund, whether the funding will be provided to us now, simply because we don't own or have care and control over that land. If that is the case, then the next question posed is who looks after mosquito control? DBCA are probably not in a position to do so. They wouldn't have the level of expertise. They don't know the areas like we do. And it really is a public health matter. So at the moment, we, as Mr. Hall said, the cooperation between DBCA and the Shire is very good, as the Shire Pres can reiterate with the work that's going on Point Duro at the moment. So at the moment, it's business as usual, but that's a question that will be asked potentially by the finance sections of the state government itself. The only legislation that could possibly have an impact, and again, this legislation is not in concrete, is that the new Public Health Act may bind the Crown. If that is the case, and the Shire of Harvey would then put the responsibility back onto the Crown. But those small details are still being worked out.
Okay. 5.3.2 Parent Naturalist Partnership MOU.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just very much a routine administrative one. On every 2 years, we bring an item to council to refresh the MOU that exists between the member councils, and it also gives an opportunity for anyone in that council group to put their hand up as the host council. Fortunately, there hasn't been any change of that for quite some time. So, Mr. Chairman, the MOU that's currently in operation is working well, and yeah, officers recommend that council support its endorsement.
Councillor Adams is in the meeting. Hopefully they've admitted to the meeting.
Okay. Okay, couple of questions. Given that there has been an MOU in place since 2011, would it be prudent to seek a longer term in the future, or is there something governing the time frame of the MOU?
Through Mr. Chair, there's no legislative requirement for the time frame associated with this MOU, but it's been an agreed position between all the member councils that 2 years gives a reasonable time frame for, if you see the next item, for a term out between Capel and Leschenault. They sometimes take 12 to 18 months to complete, so keeping people locked into those MOUs for those sort of projects is considered appropriate. But it also gives people the opportunity to review whether they still wish to be the host council. So no, it's purely an agreed position. There's nothing legislative, and it seems to be working quite well at the moment.
Okay, question 2. Page 39, the MOU is based on regional mechanisms, regional issues, and adopting a regional approach. Since 2017, it is my understanding that Mandurah, Murray and Rockingham have been deemed metropolitan and no longer attract regional assistance. Is there a risk in continuing to involve them in a regional discussion that cannot be of benefit to them? And my understanding is that their funding structure also changed with their designation as metropolitan. So how will it affect the proposed MOU?
Mr. Chairman, to date, this issue hasn't been raised as being a concern. And it's quite separate, I think, because all of the proposals are actually done through grant funding. So the local authority has the ability to make application in conjunction with other local authorities involved in the PMP or go it alone. So to date, we haven't had any issues in this regard. And to be fair, there is a state aid or state government position when it comes to coastal protection that a collaborative role across regions is exactly what we need. It's not just a metropolitan issue, it's a metropolitan, southwest and great southern issues. So going across those regional boundaries is something that's definitely encouraged. And there is good merit in having the larger cities involved in the PMP because they do have the capacity to be a larger financial contribution, contributing member. And also they are the ones that have historically been the host councils. So I definitely wouldn't want to be seeing them not included in the PMP.
Okay, does this have any implications for the current management of the public access, rubbish and weed and pest control in the areas?
Simply put, no, it doesn't. The function of a trim up doesn't include those type of works.
Okay. And how much of the Collie and Brunswick rivers is included in this?
Okay, I think we've crossed into the next item, but it actually goes all the way out to the Forest Highway.
Okay, cheers. Yeah. Councillor Carboni.
Simple question, is this just a waste of money? It's been going since 2011. Can you name me a couple of concrete things on the ground that this has done?
Yeah, it's actually given us the ability to understand what's happening with the bidding up seawall. It's also given us the ability to understand the coastal processes associated with the Ridley Place application that we're doing. And it also gives us a greater understanding what's happening with the cut and how that Leschenault Peninsula is functioning. It also gives us an understanding of what's happening to the north of our Shire in terms of the coastal dunes in and around Mile So it sometimes doesn't deliver on the ground physical works as it does in some other shires, such as Rockingham, Mandurah, Busselton, Bunbury, where there is coastal infrastructure that's at risk. Ours is very much an information exercise that gives us the ability to make informed decisions. Is it beneficial to stay in it? This shire alone has received in the order of probably $200,000-300,000 worth of funding that has assisted us to do the background research that we've done, and it's only cost us in the order of $50,000. So we've been a very successful council when it comes to getting external funding and it's solely because we're a part of this organisation.
Councillor Beach.
Yes, Simon, given the information that you've been receiving and the understandings that you get on the coast, did it point you in any direction as to what was causing all the mud to be dumped on the Binningup Reef?
Slightly separate exercise, Councillor Beach, but through discussions with UWA, we understand that it's actually associated with the southern ports, with the positioning or the distance out to sea that the Bunbury Port, I'll call it Bunbury Port, dumps their dredging waste. So it's been attributed to that, and there is an active discussion between the Bunbury Ports and also a number of residents within Binningup to try and get that matter resolved.
Thank you.
No more questions or queries? Okay, 5.3.3, consent to apply for funding Capel Leschenault Coastal Hazard Risk Management and Adaptation Plan. And we have 5 questions here, so I'll fire away with those first. So, are the funds listed in recommendation number 3 grant funds? If so, and the submission is not successful, does this project lapse?
Through Mr. Chair, if the funding or the SIMPAP funding is not approved, then no, the funding allocation won't be required. However, if you can see in the actual report itself, expresses quite a confident position that this will actually be approved. But yeah, if it's not, we will have to accept that and that funding will not be required.
Okay, question 2, the funds listed shown on page 10 of the confidential attachment show them being spread over 2 financial years. That recommendation number 3 allocates them all to 2020-21.
The project itself is anticipated to take in the order of 2 years. We, a number on that sort of internal steering committee, would like to see that achieved in a lot shorter timeframe. And for that reason, my report is requesting funding in the 1 financial year, which if the council agrees that just to do it over 2 years, that's fine. But it means that we can confidently go into the process knowing that all the funding is available. There were also some requests from other contributing councils that they felt it more appropriate that their council would be more sympathetic to purely a 2-year time frame. So it was out of respect for those councils that was included in the MOU and the confidential attachment as well.
The other question was, can we please have a map indicating the area?
There is a map included, I think it's on page 167 of the attachments. It's not a good one. We have actually been asking from the City of Bunbury to actually prepare a far more detailed map, and hopefully we will have that for council.
Question 4, does this have any implications for the current management of the public access, rubbish, weed and pest control in these areas?
No, it doesn't, no.
And the other one we answered, the up to the Forest Highway with regards to the Collie and Brunswick rivers, which will be included in it. So any other questions or queries? Thank you, Mr. Hall. Okay, 5.3.4, building envelope modification. Any queries, any questions? With recommendation 1C, no vegetation shall be removed as part of this development approval. Protect the vegetation as identified from future development applications within the enhanced building envelope. If not, are we able to include a more definitive directive to achieve this, or is this not possible to achieve beyond this application?
Through Mr. Chairman, I'll summarise that quite quickly. The applicant actually indicated in their proposal that to build the retaining wall, they didn't need any vegetation to be cleared. So this condition clearly, it's purely a reformation of what he is wanting to do, so that condition has been included. There are scheme provisions that relate to the protection of vegetation on block with building envelopes, and those are the appropriate mechanism to allow us to deal with applications on a case-by-case basis. We couldn't put a condition on some future application that we didn't, that we're not aware of. So no, we can't put a condition on an application that we haven't yet received. We will, however, probably be putting an addendum to council next week. We have had further information from the proponent in regard to what the shed is going to look like, and specifically how large it's going to be. We believe that there might need to be an addendum to this report to address that particular structure.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Okay, no more questions or queries. Okay, item 5.3.5, new planning delegation, state of emergency. So we have a couple of questions. Does this delegation lapse when the declared emergency is over?
Through Mr. Chairman, the delegation will always be there, but we will not be in a position to actually exercise that delegation unless there is a state of emergency in play.
Okay, question 2. Please explain the implications of the state of emergency planning delegations.
Okay, so look, it's a really interesting one. As part of this global virus, the Minister for Planning has taken it upon themselves to recognise that the planning and development approval process is an essential part of keeping the wheels of the economy going. So what they're wanting to do is to remove as many, and I use the word obstacles, as possible, or red tape is probably a better word, in regard to the consideration of some planning and development applications. Doesn't relate to all of them, but it just allows for greater delegation to be exercised by council officers, so that there's not that delay in taking items to council. It gives us the ability to just exercise a higher level of decision making that would ordinarily be referred through to yourselves. What it doesn't do, though, it doesn't provide an opportunity for approvals that can't be granted. They still have to comply with the regulations. We're not also throwing out the need to achieve due process or proper and orderly planning. So there's no shortcuts in terms of the actual quality of decisions being made. It's purely who is the decision maker, and it's been requested that it be officers of council, not necessarily councillors themselves.
Thank you. Question 3, does this apply to applications that have been lodged and have been in the approval process?
I would need to clarify that, but any decision is always made under the legislation of the day. So my initial response would be yes, it does. So if we received an application last week, delegation comes in next council meeting, then we have the ability to exercise that delegation. So yes, my initial response is that it does.
And question 4, will this mean that we get inundated with applicants eager to take advantage of the state of emergency and prefer to lodge now instead of due process, with going through normal procedure, as there may be a perception that will be easier?
Look, there is the possibility that some applicants will seek to take advantage of this state of emergency and request that their application get fast-tracked. But as I said before, it doesn't avoid due process and it doesn't avoid the application of proper and orderly planning. So they may get a shorter time period, but they're not going to get a relaxed decision. They're not going to get, probably they're not going to get a free kick as far as getting an approval for something that they would ordinarily not have got.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any queries or questions? Thank you, Mr. Hall. Corporate services, item 5.4.1. Just have one question here. Page 201 of the attachments, EFT 48576 refers to a payment for a performance fee. As this performance was cancelled due to the lockdown, has this amount been recovered or refunded?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. The manager of the Harvey Recreation and Cultural Centre contacted the funding body for this event. This was all part of the Raise the Roof grant funding. And we were informed, or Mr. Marshall was informed, that we should pay this amount in endeavour to assist the small performing groups. This amount, however, is a deposit for an event, and we've been informed that the event will continue just at a later date. So we were happy with that payment.
Any other queries or questions with regard to 5.4.1? Okay, item number 5.4.2, financial statements as at 29th of February 2020. I have one question, page 214 of the attachment against the heading finance borrowings, actual 23%. There is no explanation for this on page 216, notes to the financial performance. Could an explanation please be provided?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, and another good question from Councillor Beach. Normally, we wouldn't include notes for finance and borrowings. This section of the budget is set aside purely for the principal payments of self-supporting loans. And so normally it would be an amount in and an amount out. Now, the difference between the budget and the actuals is significant in that we did budget for the first payment of the Brunswick River cottages. But of course, that loan has been pushed back a little bit. And so the actuals is down. But that's what the finance and borrowings section is for self-supporting loans.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Any other questions or queries? It's 5.4.2.
Mr. President, sorry, but while we're on this section, do you mind if I just make one correction? In the, and I do apologise for just finding it now, you look over these items and you look straight over things, but on page 54, the end of period profit, we're showing 0. That should actually be 15,734,102. And where it relates back to is on page 214 of the attachments. So right down the bottom, I guess 3 lines up, you can see the 15,734 under less estimated expenditure to end of year. So we would normally not show that in that line. We would show that as the end of period profit. And again, I apologise for that.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Okay. Community development, 5.1.1, COVID-19 response grants program. Okay. Now, I have a couple of questions relating to this.
I think it's just this one.
This one. Have concerns that the first round of 30,000 for projects to be delivered by 30th of June is a very tight time frame. Considering many of the community groups and NFP are not meeting at the moment due to restrictions, e.g. National Progress Association, how do they apply and how will it be advertised to the community and community groups? Will the unallocated funds from round 1 be carried forward to round 2?
Yeah, okay. This response funding program is to provide immediate response this financial year, and then also a further allocation in the next financial year. So community groups will be communicated with, and the funding round will be advertised on the Shire website and in the Harvey Reporter and Bunbury Herald. We are aware that obviously it could be difficult for some community groups because they aren't meeting, but there may be alternative communication methods that they could use. But for those community groups that are currently operating and have the ability to provide programs now, this financial year, then this is an opportunity for funding. And if the funds aren't expended, it can be council's decision as to how much of those funds would be carried forward to the next financial year as part of the budget process. So we're looking at an immediate response now in regards to programs, and there are some guidelines that are provided as attachments to this report, programs now and also support for the continuing rollout, knowing that the community support that will be required and also assistance in the economic development sphere.
Any other questions or queries? Okay. 5.5.2 National Leisure Centre tender for cleaning service. Any questions or any queries? All good. Item 5.5.3 National Sporting Association request for assistance. Now I have a couple of questions. Richard. G'day, mate, you're away.
Thank you, Mr. President. Did you want to list those questions or not?
Did you want to introduce the item first, Richard, in regards to the correspondence received, and then we can address the questions that have come through?
Yeah, look, I don't actually have the full copy of that report in front of me, but the officer's recommendations or the full report, what were you chasing there?
No, well, that's okay. Maybe we can go straight to the questions, and then if councillors have any further queries, we can follow those up.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so first question, has consideration been given by staff to lease the building to a commercial entity such as council does with Sterling Cottage?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. Look, there's no consideration at this stage to look at leasing that part of the building out. The object is to try and support the LSA in the original concept, and that would be to have the LSA as the foundation members of those sporting groups commit to running it, its original intent. The only thing, of course, is that it's up against some of those developments that we know that are going on in Treendale and so forth. So they do provide a little bit of competition and exacerbate those issues. So in offering that site for a commercial entity, I think we would be open to a whole range of expectations from a commercial entity that would want to have access to it. There'd be a whole range of things that we would be open to. So no, not at this stage.
A second question, what is the capacity and implications to the management of the LLC taking over the management functions of the pavilion? If the LSA closes, will the request for kitchen upgrade be necessary?
Thanks, Mr. President. Look, LLC is well placed to handle the bookings on the venue. We currently do that for most of all of the playing fields and all of the ovals, the change rooms and accesses. So we would be well placed to run bookings for that particular building club related, not so much in the actual operation of a food and beverage outlet or a bar. That would be something that we need to further examine. And having said that, even then, we would be looking at scaling that back to more of a club involvement community-wise. So I don't believe there'd be any requirement to upgrade the kitchen if we were to go down that path, because the intent would be then that it functions particularly just for the sporting groups on those times, and also then for functions and so forth. It wouldn't be an ongoing process. So that would be, at this stage, I think we just need to support the LSA through this period and see where they land at that stage. Make no commitment from council.
Okay, question 3. Has the LSA provided the Shire with their business plan? I acknowledge that the pavilion has expanded on its initial focus of providing change rooms and canteen facilities for the local sporting clubs, along with a function room. The function room has now evolved into a restaurant through the design of the previous manager, and to a degree support through the local community. This in turn has brought about the need for additional staff and kitchen renovations. Was this the intent of the Shire for the pavilion to progress to this stage? I have concerns with the longevity of this plan, and in particular with the pending new Treendale Tavern. There will be some serious competition for the pavilion. If council concurs with the paying of wages for the pavilion staff, why is this different to be paying of staff of the Harvey Rec and Cultural Centre, and should the pavilion staff be on the Shire of Harvey payroll?
Councillor Campbell, yeah. So look, the original design for that building was only ever, I suppose, to be like a reheat kitchen, and it would have depended on those clubs volunteering their clubs to manage that, the food and beverage side of things. So with the creation of the LSA and the idea that the founding clubs would be able to use that as a fundraiser and therefore have a return on some of their investment within a year or two of creating that. Quite soon they obviously found that they couldn't achieve that with the volunteer base that they've got. A consistency of food and beverage is one of those things that you just can't maintain. And so they were in a position where they had to look at employing a part-time to full-time manager of the centre. And of course, what comes along with that, staffing, is the more expense that goes into it. They did very well in that they got PK in the final couple of years, but of course he's since moved on, and that's now left the management struggling a little bit for that one, for staffing. So look, I don't think it was ever a consideration that the LSA would get to this point at the time, even though that was the model they were looking at. And what the guys have actually said is to break even, they sort of need upwards of 80 covers. If it's the restaurant and the bar that they're looking at, they can achieve that. But in order to get over that level and into the profit area, they're just not able to achieve that amount of covers, particularly on a very busy night. The other part of that question, which was competition-wise, yes, we obviously aware of that, and that's part of the reason that we're proposing to support the LSA through 12 months worth, at least, to see how they come through with that, and give them the opportunity for the next 12 months to trade on that one. And as far as paying the manager, at this stage, the report recommends that we subsidise their payment of staff up to $1,700 a month. The idea would be they would obviously invoice us for it. Now, on those months where they actually make a profit, then obviously that they don't need to invoice us for that full amount. And that would support the bar staff as well as obviously their chef manager, which currently is in place. So for us to take it on and maybe include that position in the Shire, excuse me, as a staff, I don't think it would be warranted for the council to take that on. At the moment, that person is employed by the LSA, and of course, their obligation then is to hire and fire depending on their operation.
Councillor B.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I am concerned about the substantial cost of this development and the unknown impact of the Treendale Tavern that will have on the establishment, particularly when Kingston Drive is open. And I'm quite uncomfortable with supporting a not-for-profit organisation to compete against a private business with all the associated overheads. Now, when Stirling Cottage was brought on the market, that was a very strong consideration, and they were having to pay a rent, which was, I think at that particular point of time, 10% of their turnover, and it's now moved to a commercial rent. So I'm not sure what the difference is here between the two establishments, and yeah, I'm uncomfortable. Is there a comment from staff on that?
Look, I suppose that one is a difficult one. LSA has been operating that facility in that building prior to a commercial development, and it could be seen that, yes, the new commercial development will be in close proximity, but potentially what is the range that is considered to be in competition. I think council needs to decide what they want to do with the pavilion. If the LSA is not able to be financial through the provision of meals, what is the alternative model? And yeah, there'd need to be serious consideration as to what happens with that building. Sorry, I can't give you much more.
Councillor Beach, if I may.
We really need to look into.
Sorry, did you ask me a question then, Mr. President?
No, all good, Councillor B.
Sorry, I thought you asked me a question. Sorry.
Richard, were you going to mention something there?
Yeah, I was. The screen just froze. So I've probably lost my train of thought there. Look, I think the intent there is really just to the LSA, if they can't make it viable themselves, then obviously those founding clubs, they've already made that commitment. The business plan wise they've put together, they're putting together currently. We approached them back in November last year, and by December they were able to provide us some forward planning, and they are putting together a business plan, but obviously it's got to consider, as we would for that, their viability. So we would be expecting, although they have signed for another extension on their lease, that they would quite quickly be able to determine whether they're viable, and then they're potentially, obviously, they would come back to council and inform us of whether they want to maintain a presence in the building, and then it's left to us to manage that building then anyway. So I think it's up to council to work out where we want to go with that at this stage.
Okay, is any other questions or queries? Okay.
Sorry, Mr. President, there just one thing I would point out, just looking at page 63, the budget implications. The officer's recommendation, which is point 2, probably should also be included in that budget implication. I just note that Lauren brought that up not long ago, so it may mean that I just need to amend that before it goes to full council meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. We'll make that amendment to the council report.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, item 6, elected members' motions of which previous notice has been given. Is there any questions at all?
We've got that one and also the one on the following page.
No, all good? Okay, item 7, matters behind closed doors.
There's actually,
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Brumman's got a notice of motion.
Yeah.
Oh,
But no.
So councillors, there was 2 notices of motion there. So there was no questions on either of those. No, great, thank you.
Okay, item 7, matters behind closed doors is nil. So if we're all happy, we'll close the meeting at 6:03. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
All good, Adam.